How did she do it? Do it. Do it. Do it.
Libby, oh, oh. Libby, oh, oh. Libby,
3,
oh, oh.
2,
Libby,
1.
it's the Libby Show.
Hey everybody, welcome to a brand new episode of the Libby Show. Today's guest is someone that I have been a huge fan of for a while now. Africa Brooke is a consultant, accredited coach, speaker, and podcaster, and she is widely known for publishing the viral open letter in 2021, Why I'm Leaving the Cult of Wokeness. Her brand new book, which I have already read more than once, made tons of notes, The Third Perspective, Brave Expression in the Age of Intolerance, challenges readers to understand what they believe, value, and experience in order to confidently communicate their views in a grounded and responsible way. Africa, welcome to the show. How are you today?
Thank you. Oh, what a wonderful, wonderful intro. Thank you so, so much. I mean, we were saying just before we started recording that I'm really excited about this conversation, and I know that it's going to go in the exact direction that it needs to. So I'm just honored that I get to do it with you. Thank you.
Thank you. And it means a lot to me to hear that. So I want to start with a quote that you have in your book here, where you say, with each day that came, I chose a life of clarity. It didn't fall into my lap. I had to choose it and work for it. And something that's so special about this book is you really challenge us to dig deep and expect that there is hard work involved in being able to accurately and confidently express your perspective. So talk about what that was like for you, discovering the need for clarity in your life.
Yeah, I and thank you for recognizing that part and reading it back to me, because for me, if there's anything that I have discovered, not just in the context of the work that I do now, trying to understand the psychology of cancel culture, inviting people to push back against it, wanting people to check in on whether their silence is coming from a grounded place or because they are afraid to say what they truly think. If there's anything that I've discovered is that courage, and I also write this in the book actually, it sounds nice to say the word courage and to talk about courage. It sounds like this flowy, beautiful, wonderful thing that you get access to, and then it's just you're courageous, full stop. But it's actually terrifying. You know, it requires you to have such a willingness to be misunderstood. It requires you to face your own cognitive dissonance and your own contradictions and your own internal conflict, and to really go against the grain, which is a very difficult thing to do. So for me, I've had to do that through getting sober, which is where I would say so much of what I do now began. It began with me recognizing that I had a very big problem with alcoholism at the age of 24, but it was something that had been a constant in my life from the age of 14. So for a full decade, my most formative years, if you will. And it took a lot of courage for me to not only own up to that self-destruction, but to do it publicly, because I started writing about it publicly. I didn't have anywhere else to turn to offline, or at least I thought I didn't have anywhere else to turn to. And it took me facing a lot of my own shame, being okay with people looking at me as someone that had some kind of moral failing because I was seen as an addict, being looked at as someone that had relapsed so many times and had said they were going to do this thing again, but I was making this very open declaration. So I think for a lot of people, their entry point to me is through the work that I do now around self-censorship and self-sabotage through a more societal lens. But that's where it really began for me. That's where I got to see that courage is not a nice to have. Courage is not this comfortable thing. It requires you showing up again and again and again, even if shame is in tow, even if people don't quite understand why is it necessary for you to speak in this way? Why is it necessary for you to do it publicly? Why isn't it something that you can sort of do behind the scenes in the shadows, you know? So by the time I would say 2019, 2020 came around and I really started to notice this thing that we call cancel culture, but I prefer to call it collective sabotage. And I'm sure we can get into that as we go. But by the time that I started to realize that there was this collective intolerance that was pushing me into a place of fear, even though I had considered myself to be someone who's confident, outspoken, I had been speaking publicly for such a long time, but I saw that there were certain areas that were just seen as no-go areas. You're not supposed to have questions. You're not supposed to offer anything that could contradict what has been the so-called approved way of thinking. So by the time the racial uprising of 2020 was happening in the US and it spread all over, by the time there was the entire conversation around, are you vaccinated? Are you not vaccinated? And everything that would come after it. Even now, when you look at the Middle East, are you pro-Israel or are you pro-Palestine? All of these sort of places where people are forced to pick a side, I really realized that I was so terrified. And again, I'm sort of going back to 2020 specifically, that I was so terrified of saying, I don't agree with this. Of saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do something or put something in my body that I have no idea what the outcome is going to be. I'm being told that I can't ask any questions around it or put forward any concerns. I was just sort of done with the pretense. And that's why I wrote that open letter, which then inspired the book that I wrote.
Yes. And you took time over these last couple years to write this book. It wasn't like you wrote that letter and thought, oh, I'm ready for a book. You continued to build your message online and gaining this community that really needed something like this, a guide to move forward. Because I think as we move forward with technology, it's only going to become more chaotic, more noisy. So how do we maintain that groundedness, maintain our voices, and shut out, the external world, as you talk about, that could likely influence what we share?
Yeah, and you make a really important point there, because even in writing the open letter, it wasn't a reaction to something.
Yeah.
It was a very real response, because I had noticed the collective intolerance probably from around 2018. Something had just started to change culturally in the way that people are in relationship with each other, especially online, that there was just such a fierce intolerance for anything that didn't match up the person who's interacting with the information's worldview. This idea that your worldview is dangerous if it doesn't neatly match mine, there's this sort of idealistic, morally perfect human being who was born politically correct, and they use the right terminology all the time, and they are perfectly anti-racist, anti-white supremacist, anti-bigotry, anti-etc., etc. The list goes on and on and on. It's just this sort of avatar of the perfect human who always gets it right, when actually that is not even close to the reality of what it means to be a human being. No. Because when we do that, not only do we dehumanize other people because we expect them to match this unattainable standard, but we dehumanize ourselves. So we're always in this cycle of self-shaming, which to me is where the self-censorship starts to happen, where you start to constantly self-edit and self-monitor and self-surveil. And then you eventually start to do it to other people. So for me, 2018 is around the time that I started to notice it. But again, it hit a crescendo in 2020, because suddenly we're all online, we're all in our homes, we're all by ourselves. And the algorithm is just churning the outrage. And that's all we ever see. So we're participating in this sort of binary thinking. But at that time, I was still journaling, right? I didn't sort of just go and write the open letter. I've always been a writer. I've always been someone maybe similar to a lot of people that are part of this community, someone who always finds a way to express whatever's happening within me internally, whether that's through writing or other forms of art or creating conversation, whatever it might be. So I say this to say, I was in a place of response. I didn't just recognize these things and then just put them all online instantly. No, I was in the space of like questioning, of being like, why do I feel so terrified to say that I don't agree with this? Why am I overcorrecting my language and feeling so frightened that I might say the wrong thing? Or so suddenly my work was labeled as feminism, as feminist, I never claimed that it was anything like that, but it was suddenly labeled as that. And the moment that you're labeled a feminist in the Western world, you're made to believe that you're an activist too. So people start treating you as if you're an activist, and they place standards upon you, these sort of perfect standards. So now I can't just talk about recovery or sexual shame. I need to start talking about it from the perspective of a Black woman, because again, identity is at the center of so much of this. And then it would be, I would do interviews and I would talk about my experience as a woman. And I would have people saying, oh, by the way, you can't just say women, you have to say women and femmes. So this was in 2018, because that's much more inclusive. So I'm giving all of this context to show that there was a buildup. But because like most of us, I just wanted to do the right thing. So I was like, okay, oh, thank you for correcting me. Sure, women and femmes. And by doing that, I'm honoring, the people that want me to be inclusive, but something is also happening at the same time, Libby. I'm starting to sanitize my own experience, speaking from my own subjective experience. And because I was doing a lot of this work online too, where I'm writing my experience, people were saying, if you're going to write the word woman, you need to put an X on the E, because that is more inclusive to all women, including non-binary women and trans women, etc. And again, I was like, oh, sure, I didn't know. And then again, doing what I believe is right. And in many ways, someone could say, yeah, that is the right thing to do. But now I am modifying my language without question. Now I am stepping out of speaking about my own subjective experience and feeling terrified anytime that I share, because now I feel like I need to include everyone's experience. Otherwise, I'm a bigot. So this was a very slow progression over time. And by the time, as I've said a few times now, but 2020, I don't think we've really had enough time just yet to really process just how psychologically disturbing that entire year was, and the year that followed it, 2021 too, because there were the fallout of the conversations around gender ideology from around 2016 when Trump came into power. And then there were the conversations around race when BLM started being a global influence from around 2013, 2014. And then 2019 comes around. Again, there's the racial reckoning. But now there's the sort of medical choices that people are being forced to make. But now it's almost like you can't just look at that one thing in isolation. Everything has to be put together. And now it's about gender and race and medical issues. And if you don't take the vaccine, then for whatever reason, that makes you racist and a white supremacist and a bit, you know what I mean?
It's just constantly trying to align to everyone's reality in that moment, which is so impossible. It's like me, creating a reality for someone else without me even asking, what is your current reality? Mm-hmm. And then thinking, oh, well, they need me to be, an advocate for that. And then also for their new season in life is completely different. And you end up just kind of spinning your wheels. And at the end of the day, you don't know what you stand for.
You do. And so for me, all of that, it's useful for me to realize that, okay, this letter was not reactionary. I actually have incidents that I made myself think were small and insignificant, but actually they've been adding up to all of this. So my invitation for anyone listening and anyone that wants to be in response instead of reacting, it's really important to look at the archive of your memories and your experiences to realize that actually there have been so many moments where you have self-betrayed, where you have agreed with things that you don't agree with, where you have wanted to because you truly want to be seen as a good person, which is something that I absolutely get. You end up compromising and compromising and compromising and compromising until the point where you fully step out of integrity and cross your own boundaries, where you start to feel so uncomfortable. And then sometimes you make yourself believe that that is a reaction, but actually it's because there's been it's the compounding effect, right? When you allow for so many things to happen over time that you just come to a place of not being able to keep up with the facade and the dance and the illusion anymore. So for me, that's what it was. That letter was most definitely a response after a few years of just seeing myself participate in things that were really an integrity breach for me.
I almost look at it as, a catalyst, but also a purge of things that maybe were
Yes.
holding you back,
Absolutely.
and thinking, okay, what actually matters here to me? And what do I really care about? And you give us all the tools to ask ourselves those own questions, prompts,
Yes.
and to be patient through those prompts. Because I think
Yes.
with these types of questions, it's kind of hard to sit in the discomfort of like, oh, like when have I, created a space for someone else to feel like they have to censor? So what was that like creating these prompts? Did you ever find yourself self-censoring or hesitating while writing? And what did you do to navigate out of that?
I did. So for me, what I wanted to do with this book, and I even write this in the introduction and sort of sprinkle it throughout the book, I wanted to make sure that this is not just a rant, okay? Because I think we have enough of those. We really do. I think the always some good ones and whatever. I don't think we don't need them, but I think we can't stop there. We can't just sit in the why. Why is the culture war here with such intensity in the way that it is? Why have people got so intolerant? What is this thing called cancel culture? Does it exist? Does it not exist? What actually happened in 2020 to people psychologically? All of those things are important to answer, but we can't stay in the why. So what I wanted to do was to actually use my intellectual property as a consultant, as a developmental coach, as a researcher, as a Jungian analyst, someone who's obsessed with understanding the mechanics of the human shadow. I wanted to give the how. And I didn't want to give people my how, as in this is how you should do it. I wanted people to very intentionally go through a process of self-inquiry. And I know that self-inquiry is again, we think we want to be inquisitive in that way, as in sort of turning in and looking in our internal world, but it's so unnatural and it's so uncomfortable because as the human animal, our instinct is to externalize. That's why it's so easy to find what other people are doing wrong, what someone else should change, to advise people on this and that. But to do that to yourself is a very unnatural thing. However, I really don't think you can get to a place of courage or brave expression, authenticity, all of these things that sound so wonderful to say. You can't do that without self-inquiry. So I wanted to do that for people, to give them a roadmap that can actually change over time and to actually go through a very intimate and intricate process of turning in to see what role you're playing in this culture so you can know how you can actually push back against it. So what I did was to I've been working with clients for the past 7 years. So I went through my client archive. I went through different sort of journal prompts that I have written for myself. I watched hundreds of hours of video that I've done with clients. But I also have created this framework over the course of 4 years. I've tested it with individuals, but also with teams. So I sort of simplified all of these things and put them in a format that can allow for you, the reader, to go from the first pillar of awareness, where you ask yourself the question, what am I actually afraid of? And what that means is, if I truly speak up or express myself in the way that I want to, what do I think will happen to me? Because that's where a lot of people are right now, just that they don't have that awareness. They haven't answered that question. So a lot of people believe that if they speak up, if they push back against whatever the thing is they want to push back against, be it ideology or even their own intolerance or a different way of being, or if they want to become a different version of themselves, but they're stuck in the version that makes other people comfortable, what do you think will actually happen to you? That's a question you have to answer. Whether it's a perceived threat or an actual threat, that is a question you have to answer. So I take you through so many different things that can allow for you to answer that. And the next thing that I invite people to do is to take responsibility for whatever comes through. But this is also where you have a look at your values. A lot of us would say things like, oh, I value freedom and transparency and honesty. Is that actually true? If you look at the results in your life right now, do they show you that you value freedom and honesty and transparency? Or would you like to? right? Because there's a big difference between I would like to value these things, but currently I don't. And I think it's important to be honest about that, because in the pandemic, I promise you, there were so many people that would have said, oh, I value freedom. If you had asked them at the top of 2020, oh, I value freedom and, you know, freedom of choice or blah, blah, blah. But those were probably the same people demanding that every single person get a vaccine. And if you don't, you are XYZ. So again, it's not about shaming. It's about being honest about what it is that you actually do value. Maybe you value popularity. Maybe you actually value compliance more than you realize and conformity more than you realize. Maybe you value belonging to the point of betraying yourself in some way. So what I do, again, because I want to make it so practical, I take you through something where you get to ask these questions and have a look at whether your values are actually embodied, so you live them every single day, or whether they are desired, you would like to live them. So that's just an example of how I wanted to make sure that this book was not just a rant, not just a passive read, but something you can actually engage with and create a very grounded roadmap for yourself.
And there's a lot of grace in the way that you present these prompts, which I think we all need, is we need to realize that perfection is not the end goal. And I had a long drive yesterday and listened to your interview with Dr. Chatterjee, and and I loved it. It was such a great start to the week. And you talked with him a little bit about how this book is not meant to say, oh, we hate social media and there's no place for it. It's actually, how do we adapt to the world that we live in now, where there's actually a second world? There's our phones. And to not use it as a testing ground for our beliefs, but starting with that introspection on our own, going to friends, people that we trust to have those conversations, and then finding a way to present them to the public.
Yes, exactly. Because I think what I like to do, and this is a mindset that could be useful for anyone that resonates with this, I don't like to walk through the world thinking about and operating from a place of anti. And even in my work, I don't like to operate from a place of, this is what I'm against, this is what I'm against, this is what I'm against. I think it's much more useful to think about what I'm actually for. And you can do that and still speak about what you're against, which is, I think, where you sort of feel and can see and hear that grace that you're speaking of. It's because I'm very direct in what I'm saying. I won't sort of skirt around it. I will name what I believe the problem is. And at the same time, I always want to bring some kind of solution forward, or to invite you into a space of thinking about a solution. So I think it would be easy to make social media the scapegoat. I think it's part of the problem, but I think it's highlighting something that already exists in human nature, whether that's tribalism or belonging, or the pressure to sort of pick aside our binary minds. Our minds are binary machines. This is something that I talk about often. I think it's also where I'm able to give grace for us as people, is understanding that, again, thinking in a nuanced way is something that is actually not natural to human beings, because we need safety, we need certainty, we need to make sense of things. We don't have, if you were to think in a nuanced way when it comes to every single thing, it would be very exhausting for the brain. So the brain needs to kind of think very quickly, place people quickly, do a quick little scan, pick up key details, and then create a story that makes us feel safe. However, social media makes us do that to an extreme, and it doesn't help that we curate our own echo chambers. The algorithm creates echo chambers for us, so we don't interact with information or people that offer that contradiction that we actually need as human beings to be able to think critically. So for me, that piece on grace is really important, and it is because I try my very best to not approach things with an anti-mindset.
Exactly. I love that. I love that so much. I think that keeps the positivity alive. I think it's really easy for our culture to get addicted to saying what we don't like.
Right.
To feel either, I don't know, more in control, I think is the root of it. And so
it's true. You even see this, and I wonder what you even what your experience has been with some of the things we've spoken about. But a slight tangent, but it ties into this. I think a lot about modern relationships and sort of modern dating and sort of this, just how much we have a negativity bias, which is also a human thing that is very important to be aware of. Just how much we talk about red flags. What are your red flags in relationships? What are your icks in relationships? What are your this? No one ever talks about really what are the green flags? What is it that you actually want? What it is that you're looking for? We know very well what we don't want, so I find that in so many areas, and that's why I think this book can be so important. And I don't want people to only think about it through a political lens. It's about interpersonal relationships. Where are you being intolerant of difference without even allowing yourself to entertain something that could surprise you, you know? And I think that anti-mindset just has been so normalized. We've just kind of accepted it just as the norm. When you go into comment sections, you expect to see someone being berated, even for something so insignificant that you haven't noticed, that it can actually be a surprise when you come across a comment section that is positive and people actually have nice things to say. But I think when you look closely just at so many different areas of our culture, but especially our interpersonal relationships, you realize that we all have this sort of negativity bias. So my invitation is always for people to notice that and then try and operate from a place of what am I actually for? Instead of pushing back against, what do you want to lean into? And I think that can make a huge difference.
I think from what I've experienced and what I've witnessed is we've made things too complicated by labeling everyone's attachment styles without even knowing.
Yes.
You can't look at someone's social media or talk to them for 2 minutes and fully understand everything that they've been through. It's easy to maybe take their bad day as their character.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it is the reason why in having the social media conversation, whether I'm doing it on my platform, speaking in this way or writing about it, I wanted to make sure that I focus on how we can build a better relationship with these platforms that have firmly become a part of our lives. Because I think that's much more useful in telling people they just need to log out or whatever it might be. I think that has its place, but I think there's a reality that we need to accept, especially in a post-pandemic world where there's no longer that clean separation between our offline lives and our online lives. There just isn't, you know.
No.
And I think that there are pros and cons to that, but I think what's more useful is to think about how can I have a better relationship with these platforms when I'm on there? How can I start to think about it as my digital home? Instead of just thinking I have to put up with whatever the fuck people think I need to, people thinking they can say whatever they want to in my DMs and my comments, and I just have to, you know, comply and leave. No, I don't believe that. I think we get to have boundaries online. I think you get to be firm. I think you get to think about it as someone walking into your home and demanding, why are you not posting about Gaza? I would think that's strange. If someone from down the road but came into my house, wouldn't that be insane?
It's almost like walking in and you're brewing your tea, and they're like, why aren't you walking out in the streets talking about Gaza right now? It would be like, well, because I'm getting ready for my client meeting, or I'm getting ready for like, I don't like, what do you like?
It's just that's. And it could be anything. When you really start to realize that whatever this thing is that happens online, this thing that I think of as collective sabotage, and the reason I call it that is because to me, the term cancel culture, even though I might still use it at some points, just so we all know what I'm talking about, it's become so politicized that it either preaches to the choir or it speaks to people that believe that cancel culture is simply people in power being held accountable, right? Whereas to me, collective sabotage, especially after nearly 9 years of really studying the intricacies of self-sabotage, to me, it's individuals who are already in their state of self-betrayal, their own state of self-monitoring and self-surveillance and self-denial, where they won't allow themselves to express anything. And they have an inability to think critically and to encounter different worldviews and to not feel as if their own is threatened, when you get a collective of people that are in that state, that's when you see things like cancel culture, right? That's when you see public shaming, doxing, antisocial behavior, cyberbullying masked as activism. That's where you see all of those different things. But to me, I really don't believe that you have to put up with it. I think we need more of us that are not reacting online, but actually making a conscious choice internally to say, I'm not going to play into this culture by being so afraid of it, by being terrified of strangers. And this doesn't mean that you don't use discernment, right? And I speak about so much of this in my book. It doesn't mean that everything you need to say has to be said online, but it does mean that you treat your digital home like your home, where you make it very clear what your values are, where you make it very clear what you will put up with and what you won't. You make it very clear that you're willing to lose people that expect you to perform this sort of inhumane version of just more. It's insane. I think there's a declaration that has to be made internally. And that can be felt because a lot of us, especially if you're an entrepreneur, a creative, an artist, anyone that is putting themselves out publicly, the reality is a lot of us have created audiences that will never allow us to change. And I realized that myself. I had created an audience that expected me to think and speak and behave a specific way because I hadn't allowed myself to think critically out loud. I hadn't allowed myself to ask questions out loud. I actually hadn't allowed myself to be as bold and audacious as I thought I was. So I had created an audience that expected the version of Africa that, from whatever their entry point was to me, they expected me to stay the same. So I realized in writing my open letter and in just allowing myself to actually show all facets of me that so many people might drop off, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But that makes room for people that meet you at eye level. It makes room for people that can actually think critically, for people that can engage with humor and not feel like they've been harmed, And
so not taking your evolving as personal offense.
Yes.
Yes. Your true community is going to let you explore, evolve, ask questions.
Absolutely.
Maybe have a shift in where you spend your time, like all of those things.
Because they're doing the same, because they will be doing the same in their own lives. So I think also all of this to me doesn't have to be sort of dark and dreary and depressing, and it really doesn't. No. I think you can have so much fun with it, which is why right at the end of the book I talk about the idea of reintroduction. I think it's such a beautiful thing that you can reintroduce yourself at any moment in time, even right now. You can decide that you're not going to be a shell of yourself in your own home, which is why that mindset of home, my home right here, my physical home, and my digital home, I hold them the same. I really do. It doesn't mean that I over prioritize anything online, blah, blah, blah. But it just means on a mindset level, I have a level of respect for myself and the space that I'm curating. I am so open to being challenged. I'm so open to people having a dialogue with me that can expand my mind. But I really am not going to put up with entitlement or self-righteousness or rudeness or whatever. And that doesn't make me closed-minded if I decide to block someone or if I remove a comment that actually doesn't add anything to the conversation. I think there's so many little things you can do to actually reclaim your own space and to also tell your audience from a very kind and loving place. That's why I think reintroduction posts are always really good, because you get an opportunity to tell people who you are, what your values are, what you accept and what you don't. So I think you can have so much fun with all of this as well,
Yeah, I think our world needs more fun.
Gosh,
we need to have a good time.
Yes.
And I mean, that's, to be honest, why I created this show, is I wanted to give people a place to have these deep-rooted conversations with an element of lightheartedness in order to feel like they can escape a little bit. And then it's not always so deep.
Yes. I love
We're all just doing our best.
We really are. How do you, I'm curious to know about you, how do you find it being in the public and having an audience, having your opinions out there? Have you ever felt sort of the weight of collective sabotage or a pressure to speak or to have certain opinions, or people telling you that they're disappointed when you do share your true opinions? Have you experienced any of that?
I have what I would have experienced. I think something else has to do with that pressure of extremism. So with my show, there have been times where have had people say, "Oh, it's not like edgy enough," or "Oh, it just looks like you're it's like so happy all the time." I was like, "Well, that's not. I'm not happy all the time, but I'm choosing joy and I'm choosing color and fun, and I want people to join me in that. And if you don't want to be a part of that, then you don't have to be a part of it, you know?"
Right.
So, and so I think I have found myself navigating that a little bit,
Yeah.
but the times where I have decided to ignore those opinions, that's when I have found the most peace and the most freedom
Yes.
in
Yes.
refining what I do and being able to see that actually this is helping someone. And if it helps that one person, if it makes them feel like they can be more creative or they can do a DIY
Exactly.
project without it turning out perfect, then I did
Yes.
my job, you know?
Yes. Yes. You just tapped into something that is so also really important when it comes to this conversation. And it's the it's the piece around creativity and art and joy in times of division and polarization, destruction, etc. Because something that I find so disturbing and insidious about this culture, about collective sabotage, is that a lot of artists are finding themselves terrified in a time where we need them the most, because they are being told that there's no space for art, that they need to be political commentators, that if they are focusing on and sharing their art and encouraging creativity and joy, that for some reason they don't care. But I think this is why it's so urgent that people understand history, because since the beginning of time, in war and destruction, artists and comedians who are also artists have been at the center of keeping the human spirit alive. And I think it's a very dangerous thing when we come to a place of thinking that every single person needs to be sharing infographics, every single person needs to be sharing photos and videos of destruction. Pretty much the idea that every single person needs to be a news channel, where we have artists terrified to share their minds, their creativity, to encourage people to think differently, to find some semblance of hope. So for me, as someone who's always been an artist first, I fiercely push back against this culture because of that very reason, because I think there's too many people that are needed the most at this time that are being pushed into silence and self-exile. But it's a big problem. It really is.
It's a massive problem. And that's so important because I know that those who are in film TV, they're writing movies, they're writing plays, they're writing books that aren't speaking to every agenda that's public out there. You know, they're speaking to what they really care about. And I almost wonder if some of that fear is, well, how are people going to respond to this play or film 3 years from now if there's something that they find offensive later on? So what kind of encouragement do you offer to someone who is experiencing those blocks because of the fear of how is this going to be accepted? Are enough people going to enjoy what I put my blood, sweat, tears, finances into, you know, because I really care about its message?
Right. And the biggest thing, because I work with a lot of artists and people in the entertainment world, people that are at a very, very high level, hyper visible people, but also people that are just starting out, people that are figuring it out, people that are in the sort of middle path. And the biggest thing unanimously is the thing around identity. I don't have the right identity to be telling this story. I don't have the right identity to share this. And to me, that's part of that thing that I call disturbing, when artists won't even allow for themselves to think freely or to tell a story or to paint something or to sing something because they believe that they don't have the right identity. And I speak to quite a few people who were born and raised in the Soviet Union under communism, where art was very much under threat, where everything had to go through the government so they could decide whether this is okay or it's not okay, or you have to change this and that. And I think the over politicization of everything, including art, to me is very, very concerning, because we're throwing away our freedoms without even realizing. Because the reason why I call it the mob in the mind, there's a chapter where I talk about, you know, that internal surveillance and the self-silencing, is because once you become so good at doing that to yourself, censoring your art before you even do it, being terrified, do I have the right identity to tell this story? The job is already done. You don't need external censorship because you've already done it. By the time external censorship comes around, you believe that it's the norm. You believe that it's the norm, that these are the only stories that get told. These are the only kind of artists that are worth paying attention to. So I think, again, this is not to sort of scare people or anything like that. It's to just bring awareness to why it's so important to not allow for your mind to be hijacked. It is so important.
I love this book so much. And for those reading it for the first time, it's going to be a really wonderful journey for you to experience as an artist, as a creative. I want to ask you, who is someone in your life right now that you feel like is being really brave, that's inspiring you, that you've seen grow, that you've met during this promotion season of the book?
Oh, it's someone that I met through my open letter, actually, but she's still doing incredible work. Her name is Jessica Krause, and on Instagram, she's known as House and Habit, and she's a dear friend of mine. I can
We
tell
love
that.
her.
Do you love her too? Do you love? Is she not?
She's so funny. Like,
She is incredible.
the comic relief that I feel during this just tumultuous time in our country that almost feels like a Jerry Springer episode is, yeah, go on.
She is, oh my God. She is just, her and I are always thanking each other because we feel like we keep each other going. I haven't come across anyone like her. She is literally one of one. The way she is able to dive into these things that are so nuanced, so detailed, so contentious, and to add that element of humor and art and just commentary and just wit and just glam and oh my goodness. That woman is an absolute powerhouse. If you are not following House and Habit, Jessica Krause, please do. I love her so much. And yeah, she had been following my work for a while, and then we connected after I posted the open letter. And we've just been an incredible support system to each other. She's amazing. So she's the person that comes to mind immediately.
It's almost like watching a documentary on,
Yes.
Documentaries are often something that already happened and maybe sometimes the present, but this is a present moment that not everything is what you think.
I know.
And that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of what she does.
And she's made people interested in politics at a rate that's unseen in modern day society, especially online, on social media. What she's done, she's really innovated something, and it's actually not something that can be replicated. That's how much she's one of one. And she's just hilarious. Exactly, you nailed it. I just love that she really doesn't give a fuck. She actually doesn't.
She
There's nothing you
literally
can
does
say.
not. It's a massive sigh of relief too.
Right?
To see people that are, I think I put an asterisk somewhere in the book about having a sigh of relief just through reading. I think it was about not holding the disappointment of other people.
Yes.
Yeah, because
exactly.
I think we do that.
And that's a little sort of mindset that I would offer to anyone listening to this, is that one of the things about this culture, this cancel culture, if you will, is that you have to believe that it can take you down for it to take you down. And I know that can seem like a very abstract thing, but I'll give the example of someone like me and Jessica, for example. We've had a lot of people push back on our work. I don't agree with this, blah, blah, blah. You should speak about this. You shouldn't say that. No, I'm not going to do that. You have to treat this culture like it's a toddler. You have to tell it, go and sit down. Mommy has work to do. Okay. That's how you have to speak to it. Because if you buy into it and you become the toddler, they will just keep coming for you. So if you look at someone like Jess, who is an extreme example in a lot of ways, which should offer relief, because if you're at a much smaller scale, that means it could be easier even. But I think on some level, you have to treat this culture as immature in order for it to not impact you in that way. Because when you believe that it's the absolute truth and they have a hold on you and they get to determine what you post, what you say, what you don't, you will always be, and I say this in the book, you will always be at the mercy of the external world. But if you just treat them like just noisy toddlers who are just interrupting your important time, there's something that can happen that allows for you to detach from it, you know. And again, it's not easier said than done, I know, but all of this is a practice, is to just realize you're dealing with people that are so immature, people that haven't met themselves. And just that understanding allows for you to redirect and reorient, you know.
Right. And you talk a lot about, you know, misunderstood or being understood rather is not the same as agreement. And that we don't have to agree with everything that someone does or has done. It's just not, it's not real, you know.
Right. But if you want to think more about sort of self-benefit, because as human beings, whether we like it or not, something has to benefit us in order for us to find importance. But this idea of understanding people you disagree with, it's not just so you can be a better human being. Sure, that's a plus, but actually it makes you more attractive socially. People really underestimate just how attractive it is to come across someone who's open-minded, has their boundary, their convictions, but they're like, sure, that's just what this person thinks. I don't agree with it, but that's fine. But if you're someone that's like, oh my God, that's harmful, it becomes...
It's like, please calm down.
It's like okay.
There is something, it's just kind of not bothered. I don't agree, but it's fine.
Yeah.
And it'll show you the people that really are like, wait, she's not bothered that I think differently than her, but I want her to because then that means I'm right.
Exactly. It really makes you a better communicator, a more effective communicator. It makes you socially attractive. So when it comes to, let's say, your professional life or things that you're doing, you will find that you're able to navigate more spaces when you have that sort of energy of openness while still maintaining your boundaries. So I think there's a big social aspect that we neglect when it comes to this. It's not just about the self. I become a better speaker. I undo the self-censorship. It actually opens up your world in so many ways. So many ways.
Yes. Well, I've loved this conversation so much.
Me too.
I appreciate your time. I want to end with a quote and a question.
Yes.
In a world that's quick to cancel, be brave enough to explore the limitless layers of your expression, dare to question, and think freely. What are you looking forward to in the coming months? And I can't believe we're saying this towards the end of 2024. I know. That is going to challenge other people to think freely. What are you looking forward to in your life with this book being out?
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's such a good question. The most immediate thing is taking the month of August off, which I do every single year. I think of it as my integration month. It's also my birthday month. So I always take August off so I can really integrate everything that has happened and everything that I'm stepping into. So this year will be no different. Well, I guess the biggest difference is that I'll be integrating just all of the learnings from this book writing process. It's been an incredible success, and the having it out in the world and in other people's hands and getting people's experience off it, it's huge. And I want to sit with all of that properly. And then the next big thing that I'm going to be doing, which really is going to challenge people, is I'm going to be launching a new show called Unthinkable Thoughts. And that's going to be coming out. I'm partnering with Stephen Bartlett for this show. So it's going to be incredible. It's going to be a very big production, and it's going to be me taking all of the learnings over the past 9 years of doing this research around self-sabotage and self-censorship, and really creating the space for the conversations that we've been told we can't have. So that's what I'm most excited about. Very excited about.
Well, I'm excited for it as well, to see what's to come in the next few months. And thank you for being brave with us and for writing this book.
Thank you.
I'm excited to see
Thank you
what's
so
next
much.
for you. Of course.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you, Africa. Hope you have a good day and good evening, I guess, where you're at.
Thank you, my darling. It was such a great conversation. I loved speaking to you. It flew by. The time just flew by.
That's always the goal. So thank you so much. And if you ever need any connections in Nashville, please reach out. I'd love to provide.
Amazing. Okay, we'll be staying in touch. Thank you, my
All right.
darling.
See you.
It's the Libby Show.